Hi everyone, you're watching the lab demos at cloudsecuritymasterclass.com. Each of our labs have a supporting article at our website. Please check those out for a well-rounded learning experience. Permissions boundary is another type of AWS policy. But instead of granting or revoking permissions, it is used to limit the total permissions that can be applied to a particular IAM principal, whether it be a user, group, or role. If you have a permissions boundary applied to a principal, the total permissions that the principal can have would be limited by the permissions that the applicable PB policy contains. In this lab, we will be creating two users, admin and developer. We will give the flexibility of permissions management to developer user by granting IAM role and policy creation privileges and see what is insecure with this design. Then, we will implement safeguards for this design by applying the permissions boundary to protect against sensitive activities using the example of deletion of CloudTrail audit logs. So for the setup for this video lab, we have created two users. One is our administrator access, which is this user called named as Leo. And Leo has the administrator access managed AWS policy attached to it. Then the other user is Carolina, and Carolina has the data scientist managed policy attached to it. She's mimicking the role of a developer for this use case. And for this video, we have also attached a custom policy to user Carolina for her to be able to create roles, create policies, and have the flexibility to not have to go to the IAM admin for these critical activities. So if you see this policy, and if I go to the JSON, you can clearly see that the main policy here is the IAM create policy and the IAM create role, and all the other policies are kind of like the sub policies um, which you need in order to be able to create role or to create policy. You need to be able to tag or get policy or list roles and stuff like that. And apart from that, I have also created a CloudTrail in the US West 2 region in order to mimic the use case of a security engineer who may have created or configured a few security items in this account. And we will see how some of the decisions regarding permissions management that we have taken in order to give flexibility to developers would impact the security configurations in this exercise. We will also be using named profiles in this video lab in order to be able to switch between the two users and a custom role that we will create later on in this lab. And the way named profiles works is that they store all your credentials that you use in your terminal in one single file so that you can switch between these users. And they're stored in this file called /.aws/credentials, which is stored in your home directory. So this is how it looks like. I have already stored our user Leo here, credentials for our user Leo here, and credentials for the user Carolina, and a placeholder for a custom role that we'll create later on. So in order to switch between these roles, all you have to do is you have to export AWS underscore profile is equal to the name of the profile. So for Leo, it will look like this, and we can just confirm using get caller identity that this is in fact the user Leo. Similarly, if I want to go to Carolina, I can do like this, and you would see that user Carolina is logged on. So let's see what's insecure with this design for permissions management that we have done so far. So remember that we gave Carolina not only the data scientist privileges, but also privileges to be able to create roles on their own. So let's try to see if user Carolina is able to delete the CloudTrail that we created before. So this is the CLI command for deleting the CloudTrail which we have created before. And let's see what happens if I try this with user Carolina. So since Carolina does not have access privileges to be able to do this operation, it denies the request. But Carolina does have the permission to be able to create a role. So let's see what happens if Carolina tries to create a role called role to rule them all, and see what happens there. So as per design, Carolina is able to create this role. Now let's try to add a policy to this role in order to give it the administrator access privileges. So again, as per the design, this works. We are able to attach the administrator access policy to the role to rule them all. And let's now try to assume this role from Carolina's user. Okay, and then again, that as per design, this works as well. So let's copy these credentials over to our named profile, which we have already created a placeholder for this user. We just have to export this role one, role one, yes, and just confirm if we have the right identity. Okay, it's the right identity, is the assumed role to rule them all, and session name is Carolina.session. Now let's see what happens if we try to run that CloudTrail command again. Okay, now the CloudTrail is deleted. So essentially, even though Carolina's user did not have the permissions to be able to delete a CloudTrail, she's still able to bypass that because we have already given her the IAM assume role creation and role assume privileges. And that's really the insecurity with this design of having to give flexibility to developers, but you're not able to safeguard against these sensitive activities. And this is just an example of CloudTrail. There might be other sensitive security or non-security items that you would want to safeguard against. Now let's see how the account administrator Leo can help create a safeguard against this design of delegated IAM permissions by using permissions boundary. So we are in the policies section in IAM, and we will create our very first permissions boundary. The first permission that we'll add here is a blanket allow all. And this is due to the nature of permissions boundary being the maximum permissions applicable to a role or user. We start with the blanket allow. So I'm gonna do a start here. Select all resources. The second permission that we'll add here is to deny any sensitive activities that we do not want any developer or non-admin personnel performing. In this demo, we'll use the example of deletion of CloudTrail, but you might want to expand this based on your own organizational needs. So I'm going to select CloudTrail from here, switch to deny permissions, select the action delete trail, and in the resources, I'm going to specify the ARN, which is specific to the CloudTrail that was created for this demo purposes. The third permission that we're going to add is to deny creation of roles or users who do not have the permissions boundary attached to them. So I'm going to select IAM, switch to deny permissions, and select create role and create user. In the resources, select all resources. In the request conditions, you're going to specify the condition for permissions boundary, with string not equals. And I'm going to copy the ARN of the permissions boundary, which by the way, we haven't created yet. We're creating it, but we can still specify the ARN string here. So I'm going to copy the ARN from any other policy and just change the name of to reflect the same name that we're going to create. So I'm going to name this policy PB underscore realm protector. Finally, we'll deny any actions to update this policy from any other user except the, the account administrator, which is Leo. I'm going to click add additional permissions. IAM, and this was create policy version. And this permission is the permission that's needed to be able to update a particular IAM policy. And in the resources, we can specify the ARN of again of the policy, this particular policy that we're creating right now, PB underscore realm protector. In the request conditions, we're going to specify Leo, which is our account administrator, and just to create an exception for Leo to be able to update this policy if needed. I'm going to copy the ARN for Leo. So there you go. We have the 4 policies in this permissions boundary. If you see the JSON, so first of all, we added the blanket allow all. Then we added the permission to deny any sensitive activities. We took the example of CloudTrail delete. Then we denied the actions IAM create role and create user only if this particular permissions boundary was not attached to those 2 identities. And then we also denied any actions to be any actions which might update this policy from its intended state, except from the user Leo. And I think I made a mistake here. This should be deny, not allow. So I'm going to go to my editor, click on this, and switch to deny. So it looks good now. I'm going to click on next, and I'm going to add the same name which I used, is pb underscore realm protector, and click on create policy. So with the permissions boundary created, I'm going to go back to my user Carolina and going to attach this permissions boundary to this user. And you see the section for permissions boundary in the screen here. I'm going to click on set boundary, search the policy that you just created, and that should be it. The user Carolina is now protected with the permissions boundary that we just created. We will now backtrace the same steps as we did before to delete the CloudTrail and see if those steps succeed now with the permissions boundary in place. Let's first confirm if the caller identity is accurate. It is. We are logged in with user Carolina. If we run the delete CloudTrail command from this user, it should be denied, which was the same behavior as happened before, since no IAM permissions have been given to Carolina. So let's confirm that. Now Carolina plans to create a new role in order to bypass this action by giving that role administrative privileges. Let's see how that fares out now. Now this is where Carolina is blocked, and this behavior is different from what we have seen before. And this is happening is because the create role command is being denied, and the denied is coming from the permissions boundary, since we have explicitly mentioned in the permissions boundary that any create role command must be denied unless it has the permission boundary created by Leo attached to it. So now Carolina tries to attach that permissions boundary to this role and tries to create it. So this is the same command for create role, but it now has the permissions boundary attached to it. So this works now. And then Carolina tries to attach the the administrative privileges to this role. which again works as expected. And then she tries to assume this role using the AWS STS assume role command, which as expected spurts out the credentials, and she's going to copy those credentials to the credentials file. Now she's going to export the profile for the role credentials that she just copied, and let's confirm if our user is accurate. So STS get caller identity is now showing the assume role to rule them all with Carolina that session. And Carolina now tries to delete the CloudTrail using this role, which should be able to since the role has account administrative privileges. And this fails. And so even though the role has account administrative privileges, which is the administrator access IAM manage policy, this role is not able to lead the CloudTrail. And the reason is because we have explicitly denied this behavior in the permissions boundary. And that's that. So using permissions boundary, our administrator Leo is able to give flexibility to developers to be able to create their own roles, but still prevent them from performing sensitive activities like deletion of CloudTrail. So this is it for the lab walkthrough. Keep watching out for more videos and articles at cloudsecuritymasterclass.com.